and what may have been silently or mass organizing people's lives and the issues that they're presenting in therapy, to transform then, meaning that we make the imagined real, that it's not enough to just identify problems, but that we have to help people both envision and then translate those ideas into practice to the extent that we can. So you can move on to the next slide. And yeah.
Oh, heaven knows I'm trying. Let's see. What's wrong with me here? There we go.
So, hi, everyone. My name is Maria, and I'm very humbled for each one of you being here today. I'm a little bit starstruck, actually, by each and every one of you, and just very grateful that you're sharing your afternoon with us today. So, who contributed? So, in the very first edition of the book, we, used this idea of sociocultural attunement, this what I call a critical lens, and applied it across all the models of family therapy. And then what happened was that we began to see that people were being influenced by what we were writing. We were certainly influenced by so many of you here today and what you have written and what you have done. And then, so then in the second edition of the book, we asked colleagues then to share the way in which they're working with us as contributors for the second edition of the book. And we did so again in the third edition of the book as well. Some of them identify, as people of color, queer, LGBTQ, of different nationalities, but we wanted to center a multitude of voices of scholars and people, not only in family therapy, but we had people in other disciplines as well that were applying this concept of third order thinking in their various contexts. So that was generative for us and just thrilling and also very humbling to see how they were using our work, but we were certainly aware of how we were using all of their work, and your work included for all of y'all here today. So these were the people that were that wrote, that we included as text boxes in the third edition. So we really hope that you will read their text boxes as well and see how they apply third order thinking toward third order change in their various contexts of their lives.
So what's new in the third edition? A lot. Because a lot has been written as we went through the recent years of what's being published. There's been an amazing amount of interest in this kind of work. And so we just cited a whole lot of new articles and new people, and sort of developed a little more this idea of socio-relational determinants of health. So in public health, they talk a lot about the social determinants of health, the physical places that people live, and sometimes people say, the zip code determines your health status. And that has always included relational components, but we really highlight those in the book and sort of framed it through that language. We also became aware that as we are orienting the therapy through a socioculturally attuned lens, that affects assessment. So we included a new chapter on assessment, and we also this time created a variety of supplementary materials like handouts that you can use and worksheets and things, and video, not video, but PowerPoint for each chapter. And then we also have an introductory little video that people can use if they want to share it in their classes or something of us talking.
Okay, so what's next? I think this really harkens back to what Carmen was saying at the very beginning around some of the things we're thinking. There's a lot of what's next, but the ones we want to sort of briefly mention today have to do with so many people helping us critique the work that it's still very Western Eurocentered. The ontology, the basic underlying ontology of our work is still pretty modern, postmodern, metamodern. And so now we've been looking a lot at ontological attunement. So going beyond epistemic justice, which we include, of course, in epistemological justice, to looking at ontological justice. So that's kind of one of the things we're working on at this point, which will likely be called fourth order thinking, but that's still sort of in the oven. And then, of course, just trying to do our best to keep up with all the amazing work that's being done. I think another thing that's interesting to us right now is the societal context is changing all the time. So we did a lot, or we did sections in this third edition on isolation. Oh my gosh, what was it? Maria and Carmen, you
Polarization. We
Yeah.
talked about
Individualism,
individualism. Thank you.
inequity.
Yes, thank you. As you can see, it's right on the top of my head. And the piece around polarization has been something that's been pretty interesting as far as looking at new developments as we get more and more polarized, both due to epistemic views and economic situations and all of that, as well as ontological differences. So trying to focus quite a bit on how do we as family therapists resist polarization and help families bridge what's happening now, where we're being impacted by this sort of turning away from each other and turning sort of against each other. So those are some of what we're working on or have been working on more recently. Of course, there's a million other things because, everybody's got lots of great ideas, but that's.
So I think this would be a good place for us just to turn the PowerPoint on. And the three of us.
Because that's the end of it. Okay, let me stop sharing my.
What happens when Maria, Teresa, and I get together, and it's happened with other colleagues, several of you that I see here that I've had recent conversations with. They're generative conversations, and the very act of engaging with each other and trying to work together means that we keep expanding the way we think. So we thought we would just take a bit of time for the three of us to chat with each other about what it was like for us writing in this in this context of the things that we've just mentioned, and being aware of the social isolation, individualism, that we are living in a world that we keep hearing that so many people are isolated. And here we are, a discipline organized around relationships and the value of relational thinking. So Maria and Teresa, how was that for you?
I think about, all of these topics, I think about how they're all interconnected, the political polarization that's happening, not only in the United States, but in many parts of the world, and the othering and how upsetting that is. And in my clinical practice, how so many of the people that I work with are asking the question, I feel disconnected from my family. I feel disconnected from my significant other, from my children, because we have different ideological beliefs or ways of thinking of what is good and bad, right or wrong, or just even politically, and how even that is polarizing and upsetting to so many family members. So that became more and more like a part of our daily lives, right? Like this othering, and so how upsetting that was. And that's something that we continue to talk about. And one of the things that we talk about in this third edition of the book is how do we ourselves protect ourselves from using that polarized thinking and that polarized language of us and them and doing that othering. And that essentially, like we knew from even like second order thinking with feminist informed family therapy, saying we must assess ourselves, like we must check ourselves, and see how we're part of that conversation as well. So that requires that critical self-reflexivity. And that's really an important part of how we can help others with that by first noticing how we're participating in that ourselves. So we've done a lot of talking around that as well.
Yeah, the ability to hold tensions between, and family therapists are really good at that. We've done that since forever. And the ability to say, these are two very disparate ideas or ways of looking at the world, and we've been able to hold those tensions. And I think we think it's really important at this point, right, to continue to remember that and to avoid things like, well, I don't know why they think that way. Or even, you hear students sometimes saying things like, I'm so angry at this person because they're so unaware. It's tempting to sort of take that position, but to instead really do what we're meant to do as family therapists, which is not to make a decision about that position, but to work with those positionalities and to help people become increasingly aware of how they affect their lives and their relationships, and to really find bridges or build bridges between ways of thinking that that can continue to keep us connected even when we have what seems like very disparate ideas. And for me, I always think about how I don't think this is unintentional. I think this is part of the power dynamics that we're dealing with as the world and as a broader society. So for me, it becomes really, I don't know what the word is, but like really think about, oh my goodness, don't fall into this trap. This is the colonization trap 101, divide and conquer. We just can't let this happen. And so that's been, just to add what you said, Maria, about polarization and the importance of always pulling back and looking at that bigger picture. And if we're still caught in it, that means we haven't pulled back far enough to look at how big the picture is and the many things that are going on that we're not really aware of, but that we don't want to fall victim to. And even in our field, like, the sort of competition between family therapy and counseling, or counseling and psychology, or whatever, those things about who knows best, and can be also very polarizing. So, and then you lose all kinds of potential connectivity and ideas and solutions and stuff in that process. So, it makes sense why we need these identities and why the field needs where it's come from, and so it all makes sense. But it's at a time where we want to just be as aware as possible and moving away from that as much as possible.
Well, and you're getting at, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about those tensions again, about being aware of positioning. Like I've taken up the term positioning that I got from narrative therapists and such, to think about how the practices that we and the people we're supervising and mentoring are doing, being accountable for the values that we are maybe unintentionally supporting and being more intentional. And so at the same time that we are building bridges, and I think one of the values of sociocultural attunement is that it means that you have to really get where people are coming from. So students often say, oh, I've become more understanding or more appreciative of how, maybe this white male has been taking a pretty dominating position or not attuned position, but in attuning to him and the social location that he comes from, we engage we really mean everyone. That includes people who have been marginalized, but it also includes people who end up in societal perspectives in power positions that they may not even feel or be, may not be their experience. And so there's all these tensions in terms of having this overarching perspective that we're all in a context. And and so it isn't just that we're saying every perspective is, these are the kinds of conversations we get in with each other. Well, how do we dance with this? Every perspective, some perspectives are from a therapeutic point of view, they are not as healthy or as promoting of well-being and of relationality as is another perspective. And we are at one time trying to counter that, and on the same time trying to recognize the context that gives rise to these. And for me, a lot of my recent work has been around recognizing emotion itself as being structured by these larger social forces. So even something as personal as an individual's feelings as well as their thoughts and cognitions, they are not just coming from them, but we're all part of these processes that contribute then to the polarization and to the oppression. So we try to articulate in the book with good, clear examples of ways to talk about things, what it might look like through a particular lens of family therapy, to bring in a more socioculturally attuned perspective, but all within this broader umbrella of recognizing that we live in such a fractured world and that people need each other.
Yeah, as you're talking, Carmen, I was thinking about how one of the things that I really love about family therapy, and I'm proud of us as family therapists, is our willingness and ability to think interdisciplinary thought and go out and get beyond our field and look at what other people have learned and studied and so on. So when you were bringing up emotion, for example, this book, we might have done the last one too, but we focus a lot more and include a lot more research from the sociology of emotion. And it's just like mind-blowing. So you see this work that people have been doing, or, the material realities of these systems, different people thinking and looking at these societal dynamics from different perspectives. And for me, it just changes the way I think, and it makes things more complicated. There are more tensions, but it's very exciting to think about, when I get upset about something, what are the power dynamics involved in my upsetness? What are would I be as upset if my boss says something to me than if I don't say student because that's a worse way of saying, but then if a colleague said something to me, like whose criticism elicits the most emotion from me and why. Just all these sorts of dynamics that then become very practical that therapy process.
And what the emotion and what the feeling is. I mean, like whether it's being shame or whether it's feeling entitled or
right.
All those.
That's the naming it. That's the naming it.
Right.
And that's why I want to tap into what you're saying too. Like for some of you who are not familiar with our book or the first or the second edition of the book, when Teresa's talking about the interdisciplinary focus, we really did, when we talk about the sociocultural attunement, it's such a broad lens. You're like, well, we've been socioculturally attuned as a field for decades. We've been looking at, sociocultural responsivity, sensitivity. Remember back in the day, it was, tolerance and then acceptance, and it's gone through its own developmental trajectory. But what I have learned so much about being co-authors with Carmen and Teresa is the interdisciplinary nature of this critical lens we're calling sociocultural attunement. Teresa was really pulling in, especially you, Teresa, critical geography was an important part of the lens. We pulled in critical race theory and queer theory and all the feminist informed theories, all the critical social theories. And then we applied them across the major models of family therapy. And so that's what each chapter of the book is, with the third edition actually being a chapter on assessment and a chapter on ethics. And so I would like for us, since while we have, this 30 minutes of us just talking before we open it up to everyone else, to talk a little bit about third order ethics, because I think that's an area where I find that really enriching personally to think about that in my own clinical practice. But I would like for us to have that conversation, if that's okay, and then really whenever we're ready to open it up. But that's an important piece, the assessment and the ethics, I think, too.
Thank you, Marie.
Well, and it makes it, part of, in any group, we all play different roles, and my role is always, so what does this mean in terms of what do we do in therapy?
Mm-hmm.
And the ethics, third order ethics, which, like the book itself, Teresa took the lead, with her thinking of, and she had written about third order thinking, before a book and such. But translating it into third order ethics was new for us, but it was the next logical, practical application of thinking about the decisions that we make clinically in the moment by moment of practice. What question am I going to ask? Who am I going to ask it to? Who am I expecting to be vulnerable here? And who am I putting the burden of the work on? And those become ethical decisions and practical decisions in terms of if you're really going to create change that is supporting everybody in the system. But the thinking about it as ethics has really been an important eye opener for me as part of our working together.
Right. I think, a lot of those things come from aha moments as we read other people's work. So I'm thinking of the work. It's hard to start pinpointing all the people that we've learned from, because you're going to leave lots of people out. But I remember the day I'm reading about, it's Heckler and Larner, right? That we're talking about, the everydayness of ethics, and just your mind just goes, oh my gosh, that's huge. This is not about am I taking a social justice position? And of course, I always refer back to Carmen's early work on power as a practical matter. So when you get out of am I a good therapist or bad therapist, or are the people around me good or bad based on their focus on equity? And which is a polarizing position. And instead you say, this is very practical. When people are in more equitable relationships, they're healthier physically, mentally, and relationally. When we attend to power in the right way, we get further, so, and that every decision we make is not like are we going to defend those who are, who are in the bottom rung or whatever? We're really looking at what's the practicality of this? What's the real nature of not having enough material resources? What happens when one person in a relationship overpowers the other? And this, for a lot of us, and myself included, as a child, was so real. It's so palpable as I watched my father rule everything, and my mother gets sicker and sicker. And I think these are kinds of things that you see in clients all the time, right? So once you start paying attention to that, it's like, it's an ethical decision, because it's a decision that will help solve the problem most effectively. And to not pay attention to power is actually usually unintentional, but it can be a process that supports inequity. So it's not like you can just sort of do it or not. You're always taking a position, right? So you're sort of on the hot seat no matter what. And then how do you decide, and how do you, we don't want people in there, warriors for the underdog. We also don't want people there that are like, well, this is how they choose to live. You're hoping that therapists will really engage in these ideas and think, what happens when this dynamic occurs? How is it maybe helping some? It's usually not helping anyone, but okay.
Who
I
is
really
the advantage? And
Yes, and disadvantage. And I want to just say one thing. When Carmen was talking about how the three of us get together and talk, I was waiting for her to say, and usually Teresa talks too much. So I'm going to stop there.
well, and the dynamic is always, always Carmen would, Teresa and I would get going really deep into like philosophy and theory. And then Carmen was like, what does it look like in the room? Can we just talk about what does it look like in the room? And from what, and so for me, that was, I love that. Or they would write and I would type, or I would talk and they would type. And I just want to talk a little bit about our process too, because I've been critiqued a lot about people saying, well, Maria, what's your role in this? What did you do? And I said, all of it. And they said, well, what did they do? And I said, all of it. And it was all of it, and we don't even know where we begin and end. And I'm like, oh, are we poorly differentiated then? Have I become completely undifferentiated in one?
Only thing is in chapter 4, right?
But, right. But it's been incredible. What I want to emphasize, and I'm it's wonderful that you are here today to help us continue to grow and learn. But that this is a journey we're all on, right? Like we're all trying to continue to think about how we can do this work in the most ethical way. And this third order thinking is, we didn't really even talk about that much, Teresa, like right now, but like, what does that mean? Because we included it in the subtitle of our text. So to be a third order thinker and to use third order thinking across all the major models of family therapy, but also just in general, I'd like to hear you say that, Teresa, like, what does that mean for you? And I think it'd be nice for them to hear that as well.
Yeah. So I always dread these questions because I think, do I know? But I guess, first of all, you don't know. I don't know because it's always evolving and changing. But for me, it's about, just can I think at that meta level? Can I think about the most intimate thing happening in our brain, the brain chemistry, all the way to how that's impacted or impacts the broadest global relationships. So it's this connecting across all these levels of systems and trying to understand how they all come in together and recognizing that for me, I'm not going to get a complete view of every political system and every societal structure and all that, but there is a connection between all that. And when I'm able to back up a little bit, think about it critically, I guess. That's, you see certain things and then you're like, oh, once you see those things, it's liberating. Now I can see that all the way from who little baby Fufu at 2 years old sleeps with, all the way to, whether some political campaign we may or may not be involved in. I mean, it's across the board. It's that ability and for me, an excitement about thinking at that level of meta. And then, it's always stretching. What's the next and what the instrument that meta lens just a little bit more when we're looking at third order thinking, so to try to push it around a little bit more. So there's a little bit of work on that in there to look at humans and post-human systems and different things like that continue to push our thinking out of just a not only self-centered, community-centered, Euro-centered, whatever, but human-centered world. And that just pushes us to think broader and broader. And then always bringing it back home to the so what. So you think about all these things. How does that affect us in therapy? How does that affect people in their daily lives? How does it affect me?
And that's exactly where I was going.
Oh, sorry.
That's great.
In that, again, this is not new. In decades and decades of people saying our work is not neutral. And that's, of course, how we begin the book. But third order thinking and realizing, well, what does that then mean if we're connecting all these dots? Part of those dots is that we can't, if we sit back and we just are sort of a silent, not necessarily silent, but trying to be a neutral moderator, then we are replicating the status quo. And what I find in doing supervision and in talking with people is that that's often part of that tension is, okay, they do the third order thinking, they can start to see how these patterns are affecting what's in whatever the presenting issues are with the client. But how do does the words we choose, what we choose to name something makes a difference. What we ignore and what we punctuate makes a difference. And so third order thinking comes down to that sort of practical, what am I going to say and do and why, and being accountable about that. And it also means taking some leadership, and that's the fence, at least for me, that I always feel like I'm struggling between not wanting to be the leader or the, directing people, that decisions are still in their choice. But what we're talking about in therapy, the possibilities that can arise, all of those, they are not totally influenced by me, but as so many of you who are here have written eloquently about, the story that's getting told is a collaborative, even sociocultural attunement. It's not just that I'm attuning to the client, they are attuning to me. Mm-hmm. And I haven't written about in my own personal writings. I've have some colleagues who've holding me accountable about that. But so I think just always that dance back and forth between our understandings of what's happening in the larger context, and then recognizing, or at least bringing a spirit of openness in terms of wanting to understand and recognize, because we're never going to actually get it all perfectly straight.
And this kind of self-reflexive stance is really, we see it strongly, like in narrative therapy, feminist informed therapy, and other approaches that use this, collaborative language approach, where the self-reflexivity has been so embedded. And I think that's where those were closer aligned to have been working this way. These, our colleagues and been working this way for a long time. What was trickier is this work when our colleagues and ourselves included were saying, how can we help somebody who's working from a structural family therapy lens, a strategic family therapy lens, transgenerational family lens, apply this third order thinking in their way of working. And so that's where it stretched us more. That's where it stretches a lot of people more. With other frameworks, it was just more natural. It was just like a way of thinking, a way of being in the world that just felt natural. But it doesn't, we're especially aware of this when we talk to people from other countries. And we have colleagues here that are from Mexico that are here present, and some of you here from many different countries. And so, sometimes that sociocultural lens or critical lens isn't always a part of the models or the frameworks that people use in family therapy. And we take a non-neutral stance and believe that it is useful and important, actually, to attune to power and context, regardless of the model or the framework of therapy that you're using. And I know all of us here do. And so that's why we're already telling you what you already know, which feels really awkward, because we know that you're already doing the work. And so that's why so many of you here are contributors. And I know that we're probably at time to opening it to everybody.
Yes.
But I also really want to hear from our contributors today, and our my dear mentor and former professor, Dr. Ann Prouty, who wrote the foreword to the third edition of the book. So I definitely would like to hear from her and from those that contributed, and how they're thinking about this work as well.
Okay, thank you. So yes, so contributor and anyone who we want to use the rest of the time for to hear where these guys, where your thoughts are going. And you can put the little hand up or just speak or raise your hand, whatever.
I'll try to watch the chat as well,
Oh, yeah.
if I can figure out how to do it.
By name.
So are you wanting first contributors and afterwards the general conversation?
No, I'm just saying, I would hope that everybody can participate, but I'm very curious about how the people that wrote the text boxes that were contributors, as well as Dr. Prouty, who wrote the forward, like, what are your thoughts about this way of thinking and working and how that aligns with your work as well? Just going to open it up, basically.
So if it's open, I'm happy to jump in. I don't want to.
Yes,
Please do, please do.
please do.
First of all, a lot of people were laughing when you used the word differentiation. And I wanted to say, like, differentiation is overrated. But what I really want to say is that, and I've written about this, that differentiation from is overrated. Differentiation with is really important. And I think the three of you are a perfect example of differentiation with. I mean, the way watching this go now, I'm like so happy with the flow of ideas and each of your contributions, just brilliant. I want to say that, Carmen, I remember, and I've said this before, when you and I met at an after board retreat, it must have been before 2010, and we were both starting our work on power in different ways, and we sat down and had breakfast together or coffee together and chatted about our ideas about power. And it really was a very powerful moment for me in terms of my own work. So I want to, and to see where you guys have gone with this is just beautiful. I have a couple more comments if it's okay. One is the issue of values. Blaine Fowers wrote a really good book about this. I don't know how many of you know his book on couple therapy. And he basically says, he's probably written articles as well, that the values-free neutral stance is not values-free at all. It basically supports individualism in our dominant culture. So I think that's a really important point, and you really talked about it beautifully. I wanted to ask you, you talk about ontological attunement and epistemic justice, and I'd like to know a little bit more about that. I've written about construal humility, which is the therapist adopting a stance of, that we have our theories, but as I think Monica McGoldrick said, have a theory, but hold it lightly. And that would be true with our theories, and it would also be true with our clients. I'm just curious if any of you can talk a little bit more about this ontological attunement and epistemic justice.
That probably would be me, right?
That's Teresa all day.
Yeah. Well, it's half-baked at this point. So I think I'm fascinated by this and spending quite a bit of time trying to sort out complex ideas about this. But, when you think about epistemic justice, as Fricker talked about, so on, it's more about, I'm going to probably murder this, and so I apologize without a lot of time to talk, but it's about have our individual voices heard. Is there fairness and equity and space for all voices to be valued? So important, and that's core to how we've been writing about these ideas, all three editions. Epistemological justice has, I think, a little bit more to do with, are these sets of ideas about how we interpret the world, are they included? Are they valued, and so on? But when you look at epistemology, you're typically assuming, without really necessarily noting that you're assuming, that there is a reality, and that reality is being interpreted differently, or some people's understanding of that reality is being silenced or criticized or whatever, marginalized. And ontological justice, the way we've been thinking about it more recently, and again, this probably, if I give, it'll probably be an article at some point this year, I don't know. The rate that it's coming along, I'm not sure. But it has more to do with, like, what is real, and how do we assume what's real, and what difference does that make? So that's, when you think of who gets the claim on reality. So in our book, we didn't go too far into that because that's sort of where we left it to be worked on now. But for example, if you are a therapist who really believes in science, but our field is basically based on Western science, right? Started with modernity and so on. And let's say you even go with postmodern ideas or metamodern ideas. Those are all still based on modernity. So that means that possibly, if I'm coming from that unexamined position, I might meet a client who, like myself, has had many unique experiences that don't fit into that. I've had a lot of experiences that are more intuitive, that are more across time and space and so on. Or let's say it's a person with a different set of religious realities, not views, realities, right? So it's at that level of, if I have a client come and tell me about, this happened many times, their parent died or whatever, and they experienced some post-death spiritual experience, right? Well, if I'm really embedded in modern, even postmodern or metamodern views, I, at some level, of thinking, likely thinking, well, that's an interesting experience they had, right? But I'm not really thinking, I'm not really able to suspend my own views well enough at that. I don't know if suspend's the right way. Take a superposition is what we talked about, to say, that there's not multiple realities at the same time, which is a whole ontology of its own, but that this is how this person's world is. There is a God. There is a ancestral space. There is whatever it is, that this is real, and that is reality. And so then when you get into things like colonialism and decolonializing methods and so on, you can't really, I don't think, do that well. If you have the ability to face more the ontology, the not knowing ontology, basically, and a deep sense of respect for what's unknowable. We can't know everything. And so it's got to do with that kind of thing, and the equity and justice involved in that. And that's huge. So if you look at our model, for example, our framework, it's based on an ontological framework that not everybody agrees on by a stretch of the imagination. And every step of that framework, whether it's government or local community or politics or whatever, is ontologically bound. And so it might make a nice congruent model, which I think it does, but it's not, we still have, it's not, we're not taking a superposition. And of course, a superposition, we're pulling that concept from quantum physics, where you're looking at, the ability for things not to be known until they are measured, basically. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but I know I'm talking a lot, so I'm going to stop there and hope you get some flavor of what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's
It's
beautiful.
lots to work out. Lots of don't work out.
Well,
I've still got 45 pages, and I'm like, okay, well, this is going to have to be cut a lot. And then Carmen's always in my mind going, what about the family therapy? I'm sorry, Carmen. What about the family therapy example? Which I'm like, I don't want to do those. I just want to do I just want to do the philosophy stuff because it's so fun. Does that help, Mona? Still there?
It helps.
Okay, I want to make sure I didn't put you to sleep.
I could do the review all day long, but I'll let other people go.
What other thoughts, curiosities, or just sharing your way of doing this work you'd like to open it up to? I'd love to hear that. And you're wanting to, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
And okay, Dr. Crowley, there you go.
I'll go really fast. Influence is taking my voice, so I'm just happy to be here.
So sorry, man.
That's okay, I'll be fine. But I'm so happy to see folks I haven't seen in so long. No, I was just really, really grateful to get to read the book ahead of time and to get to immerse myself again. I've used this book since y'all came out with it, and I have been so thrilled the whole time to be able to use it as a really accessible tool in master's programs in which I teach. And I think it makes some of the models a lot more accessible, brings them up. And we have students from all over the world, and we want that. And so people are coming from different perspectives. One of the programs I teach, we have people who are highly religious from many different religions, and that is their primary reality. And this does provide a skeleton on which to build curiosity and not knowing, which for some of our students and for me sometimes it's really hard to remember I don't know anything. So all this experience that I still don't know anything, that's really important to remember when we're sitting with people who we're trying to walk alongside. So I just am very, very appreciative that there's the consistency of the book, the deep thinking, but then you bring it back to how does this translate to being in the room? And it's not an easy book to read, which I really, there are parts that are, but there are parts that dig deep in, and I really appreciate that too, because it reminds us that no, wait a minute, therapy's not easy, and it shouldn't be easy, and trying to see things from other people's perspective and be truly curious is work, and it should be very much respected. And the people with whom we sit, we should respect deeply. So I'm just very grateful. So I'll be quiet now.
Thank you so much. Salva, do you want to share?
Sure. First of all, I am loving yours. Mariana, I were both students of Bennett, for those of you wondering, the inner circle for Bennett. Teresa, I'm like you. I can just talk about philosophy because for me it's lived. It's not philosophy as an abstraction, right? So I appreciate, and I really appreciate all three of you for taking us into what you're framing as the third order thinking. And two questions, and I'm sorry I came in late, so maybe you set this up when you started. I'm curious what you're hearing, like kind of what Anna's saying, how people are using it in their teaching. Because I go back and forth and my faculty were talking, like, when do we introduce this as a text in their curriculum, right? And in some ways, we should be starting with this. And there is some kind of a developmental, historical flavor that just how education gets done as education, that we start off with, here's what we started with, and then we kind of end with this. And I'm curious, are people starting with this? And to Anne's point, like it's challenging, right? Because at the same time, I love the case examples. So that's why, and we take parts of it and start because it makes it real, and then we can deconstruct to the program. So that's one question. And back to your point, wherever Teresa is, so are we at end of knowing finally?
We're at the beginning.
And I'd say that because of the book.
Who knows?
Say that again?
Who knows?
I said, who knows?
The author is dead. There was that phase. And when we were at Tech, we were reading about that piece. It was coming in the early 90s. The author is dead. And so now I think more and more as epistemic justice comes online, whose knowledge matters, what is knowledge, who gets to define it, and how do I struggle in the same way that Carmen, you're speaking about that. So when do I name it racism or sexism or some other form of dominance? Like who gets to name, and how do we phrase it when we believe in the intersectionality of all of these interlocking systems? What is proper naming, right? And so I sit in those tension. I say end of knowing in the sense of we are all in academia after the academia of the academy. And we live in a neoliberal world where knowledge is packaged and sold. So how do we sit in that tension. If we don't do knowing, what do we do? And how do we configure that? And all this from a learning perspective. So thank you.
And Liz, you're saying that you can answer that question, right? Like you raised your hand about the question about how you use it.
Yeah, I don't have constraints from academia because I'm teaching a postgraduate certificate program on couple and family therapy, which is really the equivalent of 3 semesters of coursework, like it's 94 continuing ed credits. But I don't have any constraints about, I forget even all the acronyms that you guys have to deal with. So I use it. We have 2 primary texts and tons of articles and videos and whatever. And I use this as our primary text. We can't cover all of the chapters, but we cover what I consider the major theories and use that. I mean, to me, it's compared to other textbooks, the way that you describe the theory is so practical. And then the integration, before this book, I felt like I had 2 trains, the family therapy train and the social justice train. And I was always trying to mix the tracks. But with this, I feel like it's mixed in every theory. Some theories, it's more overt, like the narrative. It's not like 2 trains as much. But it's such a beautiful offering. And I use this and Bill Madsen's collaborative therapy with multi-stress families as our 2 primary texts. And I find that the 2 books are a really good resource together also.
Thank you so much.
I think when we wrote it, we were trying to make things as the writing style as easily to read, thinking of beginning practitioners, but wanting the ideas in it to be interesting enough for you who are here. And I think we managed that fairly well. So my hope would be that people would begin with it, because otherwise, and this is the critique, that many of us have made, otherwise it's an add-on. Oh, culture here's family therapy and it's an add-on. And we're trying to do it as, that's how we're centering it.
And I just would add to that, Carmen, that in our program at Lewis and Clark, what we found over time was 2 things. One was that the equity class should come first. Why learn and then unlearn and then relearn. So that should come first. And then we also learned that we used to do a intro class that was sort of family therapy light that reviewed all the models. And we decided to up the game and encourage and invite new master's level candidates to come in and deal with the hard stuff first and to really look at the complexities. So we have moved those into first place. The first semester is not an easy semester theoretically, but it doesn't oversimplify things either. So I think and the change we saw was incredible because these therapists were so much better prepared. So I want to say that. And the other thing I want to say is that we know Ann knows this because she was his professor, but my grandson just went through a family therapy program. And he said that the models were a little bit easier to understand the way we talked about them, that there was a practicality to them because we didn't feel like we had to cover every historical bit and every, all the stuff that you think you have to include. And so hopefully it makes the models a little more accessible.
I want to I'm not going to speak long, but I just want to say one of the struggles from a writing perspective, especially in our first edition, was, we can't put in everything. And so this idea of getting back to that, who's the source of knowledge and who's the expert, for us as relational collaborative people, it was a little hard to own that we were choosing which models.
Yeah.
Whole chapter, Catherine, on contextual, which models to include in the family therapy, in the in this book. And I think over time we've grown into it a little, like we feel okay, recognizing that this is our contribution and we didn't, there's all sorts of things that somebody else would have done differently.
That there were limitations. That I mean, we always, and it's just an example, another way of us holding the tension. I am dying to hear from Dr. Dakumun-Naji. Am I saying your last name right?
You know what? I was satisfied because I said Nagi because it's easier for insurance to write my name. So don't worry. So thank you for giving me a chance. So first of all, I have to acknowledge Carmen because without her, I wouldn't be here today, and I would have not moved towards be more involved with after, and with the invitation to present in March, and somehow. This is a training program for me because I don't even know how to put the hands up. I am really an apprentice to the whole thing. It's very necessary that I do my learning here, but this is not the point. So I have a few points. So it will inspire me in the presentation of contextual therapy because, as Carmen noticed, there are evolutions, and I have a new perspective on contextual therapy in terms of at least postmodern. And so I would be very happy to share those ideas when I come up. It's not for today. But for today, there are a couple of things I want to point out to that concern what you presented this afternoon. One thing is about this polarization. I don't know if I will present it then, but I will just give you a little bit of idea. If we think of the movie Castaway, that probably very many people are familiar, and that balloon on which the castaway saw this picture, and then when the balloon falls into the ball or balloon, whatever you call it, fall into the water, it's like a huge loss for him, really, and you realize that it's some part of himself that is ripped off from him. Coming now to the polarization about ideas, about ideologies, about political parties, everything. If it is, my hypothesis is that if it's true that isolation, like the castaway, requires that you have a sort of a sort of a counterpart, is it possible this ideology becomes this counterpart that becomes so necessary for the continuity of the self that you cannot cast them away? Wow. That it would be a sort of a sad loop, that isolation creates this need for this ideology that holds you like a prop for an act, for like on which you or the wall on which you write or something, and then it's challenged. You feel ripped off like this castaway person. So then it becomes a loop because then the isolation creates that, but then this position creates the isolation that you cannot renounce your own prop and don't let anybody in. So this is something that came to my mind that I've not written about it yet, but I just wanted to share this hypothesis with you because it would be in that sense, it would need to go back to when it started. When this ideology became so important to you? When did the split occur? And then you decide to discover that it happened during COVID, where everybody was cut off from each other, something like that, I don't have the clinical tools to tell you whether I'm right or not, but I just wanted to throw this in.
Very interesting.
Beautiful. It's relational.
Right. And then
And systemic.
Systemic.
Relational and systemic.
Right. And then the other one, which is more a bit off, but not off, because people may know that I have an interest in Buddhism. In Buddhism, there is a word that is called again called voidness. And nobody can exactly understand what this voidness means. Does that mean nihilism? Does that mean whatever? But technically, it's a voidness. It's the absence of separate existence. So then, that theory of oneness, which is that nothing exists independently, then becomes very close to your idea of third order changes. That somehow that we cannot we can have the illusion that I'm a separate self and I'm me and the other people, but then, or that's my theory and nobody else, or that my emotions are completely from inside, nothing else. And then realizing what you were presenting very importantly now, that is actually very close, in fact, to what I didn't know about it, I just think about it. So these were the couple of things I wanted to share with you, because I really, really thank you for this, and look forward to reading the book, because Carmen quote me, there was a sort of a funny sort of connection of reconnecting with one person that connected me with Carmen. And there I still have to do my homework to look at the book, to read the book. I just jumped right now. So I will look forward so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. And then Dr. Kleiman, also, you've had your hand up for a while.
Hi, thanks, Maria. Dr. Kleiman, so fancy. Jody, maybe. This is a wonderful conversation. I'm just loving this conversation. And one thing I'm very grateful for is how easily you flip back and forth between and exist in both at the same time of real practicality and pretty meta level philosophy. There's a little probably quantum physics in there too. That's what I'm talking about. Particle wave, whatever. It's really helpful to me, and I can't wait to read this new edition, because it sounds like there's some real flow in it from listening to the three of you talk that will be helpful to me. I'm in the midst of slogging through writing a book on intersectionality and social justice that is not just family therapy, but more broadly clinical work and training, although I always think like a family therapist. There's lots of places where I feel stuck, and I'm realizing how much I wish I had a co-author, because you guys sound like you have so much fun. And I've written never books, but articles with other people, and they always flow better. So I'm glad you guys stay together as a team. It's really wonderful to see. So I'm going to try to internalize the three of you.
Yes, please do.
That's going to be really helpful. I mean, I use a lot of your ideas, but the whole idea of being able to apply understandings of power and how people make meaning of their realities in all these different clinical approaches is really, really helpful, because like you, my approach is sort of a meta approach. You could be any kind of therapist and use it as long as you acknowledge power and privilege and lack thereof. So
we'll be going to be super excited to read what you've written too.
Definitely.
well, let's have a conversation. I mean, we should have a
Definitely. I was going to offer that as well.
I just
want to make a pitch for AFTA here.
Yes.
Because this is what has been for me since I joined AFTA. It was always these, whether it's, first it was just mostly at the conferences, but it was about you don't come having the answers, you come sharing wherever you are at this moment with your thinking.
Right.
And then we learn, and whether you're, retired like me, or I'm theoretically retired, or
writing books,
or whether you're like Mansoir, who's still I think working on licensure, are you? We're learning from each other. He's integrating belonging and power in an article for family process. And so anyway, I want to get back to this conversation. But
I mean, that's the thing, is that there's always like a new facet that whoever is thinking and talking hasn't considered, and that's
right.
That's the richness of it. And I just love this conversation. It feels so generative, and I so appreciate the work of the three of you. and all the many, many people.
Well, and it is the value. I can write faster alone.
Mhm.
Like I just finished a chapter with Lana, or a book with Lana Kim. And if she wasn't a part of it, it would have been me saying my same old thing.
Mhm.
But she's what, she's was always willing to challenge my wording just enough to say, well, what about this? And I said, well, then we're going to have to cut out words because we're over the word limit. And it's like, and the generative conversations that happen when you're trying to write together and you have enough, whether you want to call it autonomy or differentiation or whatever, to be willing to challenge each other and not to feel like you have to just go along and see everything the same way. The three of us were really willing to say, well, I don't see it that way, or what about this? I mean, we're always very nice to each other, but that didn't mean that we felt like we had to stifle the creativity that comes out of difference. And of course, there's many differences that weren't represented in our collaboration.
Right. And that I always go back to, like, that's why we keep wanting to write this paper, like holding the tensions of doing this work, because it's not even holding the tensions, it's embracing the tensions of doing this work. Because whether you're writing or whether you're working with a family or people in your practice, or doing community-based work, or wherever our spheres of influence are with our own families or students, whoever, it's embracing this tension, and we had to embrace it throughout this whole thing. But I think that's what it means to hold this kind of psychological flexibility and this relational flexibility. And I don't know, I'm just so grateful for all of it, honestly, like this kind of growth journey that it's put me on in such an important way. Differentiation with, I love that. I love that so much. I'm curious about other people here too that haven't shared and talked about how this resonates with you, and how does this move your thinking?
Or does
be
it? Maybe
or doing.
something clunks.
Or something doesn't resonate. Yeah. Because we would like to open up the conversation really to as many people, or just whatever thoughts or musings you might be having as you're hearing them. Y si lo quieren decir en español, yo puedo traducir. So those the Spanish speakers want to say whatever you're thinking, whatever you're grasping, and I can help translate. No problem. In Spanish, by the way, don't try to speak another language, because then I can't help you there.
French okay here.
Fausto, yo sé que estás pensando. What are you thinking? He's also a contributor, and I know we actually published a book on third order thinking and family therapy in Mexico, which I'm extremely proud of. And Fausto Lamont is the lead author of that book. So I know your brain is on fire right now.
Yeah, thank you. Really, really thank you. I only want to say I'm very grateful for this opportunity to work with you. I can only say that third order thinking has opened my mind and blown out my mind. It's amazing, and makes me believe it is a truly integrative model in a very sense of the word. And I don't know what do you think about that? Because in this moment in the college, we just check all these integrative models, and when I just realized that, I immediately think, oh my God, it's so similar than the third order thinking. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
About like third order thinking being integrative.
Exactly, integrative model, like an integrative model.
I can
address a little bit of that.
Yeah.
I think I do a class on this in Poland, not in Poland, it's virtually, but one of the questions I get a lot is about it being a model. And so I think I'm being clear that it's not a model, but I think there's a tendency to want to think about it as a model. And I suppose it depends on how you define model, which we could talk about quite a while, but it's really a trans-theoretical framework. So if you try to apply it as a model of family therapy, it doesn't work because it doesn't have the qualities of a model and what a model needs to have in order to stand alone as one. But if you look at it as a trans-theoretical approach, a trans-model approach that can be integrated into and retrofit in different ways and whatever, but integrated into models, then it makes a lot more sense. And I don't know if that's answers that, Fausto, or not.
Not for this. I don't know. I just thinking about that because it covers a lot of theories, like Pierre Bourdieu, for example, or Miranda Fricker. So I really like that. I think that they're thinking like a integrative trans model, for example.
Well, and I think what it does is it allows, as we demonstrated with the chapters on the different models, is then you take the concepts that go with a particular model, and then you look at what does it mean to integrate a third order lens if you're talking about differentiation or entitlement or none of us really embraced cognitive behavioral therapy, but when we wrote the chapter on cognitive behavioral therapy, it integrates beautifully. And now there's a new book that we cited, and I can't ever remember people's names, so I'm not even going to try. But it's cognitive behavioral therapy, but they begin with sociocultural attunement, and they do cite us, but it's like this evolving. So wherever people are, theoretically located, we tried to sort of model and demonstrate how you might bring this lens to whatever theories that you're using, particularly the Western. I mean, like we were sticking with what, in our view, were the major models of family therapy that were already there. And one thing we say in the book, I think, is that part of the reason we did the book is that we love the models of family therapy we already have. And we wanted them to not be separate from, and as Liz was saying earlier, it's not to have one strand be here socioculturally attuned practice, and here's another strand being whatever model of therapy you practice.
And I think, like Fausto, what you're saying about integrative approaches traditionally, at least in English, so I'm wondering if you're also thinking in Spanish, but an integrative means you're pulling from different models to work in an integrative way. And I think what I'm understanding you to say is it's pulling from many different disciplines and traditions.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
Yeah. And so that for me is like, it's pulling, like you're saying, from Fricker's, epistemic justice, and whether it's critical geography or whether it's physics or whatever. But that's how family therapy was born, of all these different disciplines. So I think it's a continuity of that, actually. Exactly what
I agree 100%, Maria. I just want to make the same point that it's an integrative approach, an interdisciplinary approach that you can apply trans-theoretically across models. And that even in the process of deciding, what will go into that interdisciplinary framework is, that's huge. You talk about what counts and what doesn't count. That's about us making a decision about, is this something that fits or doesn't fit? So just by nature of doing that, just like with any model, you're going to leave things out that others would find important and accentuate things that, So that's not a new process either.
I think we have time for Salia to make your
Yes,
comment.
thank you, Fausto.
Thank you.
It's just a couple of things. You said you love the models, Carmen, and this is something about family therapy I just love, right? And I often find myself talking about decoloniality and decolonizing therapies that is entering and saying family systems has been something that we've been grappling with these issues for a much long time. And in some ways, that's why people got out of psychology, that they're long to a psychologist, you know, and who come from the traditional psychology and integrate. So I'm curious to hear where you all think, what sort of are thinking and this, I want to call it a movement, where this movement is moving us, and that I'm saying it right, decolonizing therapy and decolonizing practices, like, are they different traditions that are coming from different spaces? Are they just your thoughts about those two threads, how you might see it? Because I have my own version on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maria?
That's Teresa all day again.
No, that's you, Maria. You have a brand new one.
She keeps saying it's me. I learned it from Teresa. She
No,
was the one that did it. But no, I feel like, yes, they can obviously that's holding the tension too, right? Like we know all of our models are male centric, Eurocentric, you know, so we're always holding that tension. We love them because we see the value in them. And, but again, you have to hold the tension of, or embrace the tension of even working from those frameworks and then integrating this more, you know, this sociocultural or critical lens of working in this way. So those are my thoughts around that, because you're absolutely right. They are stamps of that time period in which they were developed, but they're not static models either. And they continue to evolve and change, and we hold them like they're static, but they're not at all static. So I want to mention that. What are your thoughts, Teresa?
Well, I appreciate that. I
And
think
then we're gonna have to wrap that up.
Yes.
I think that we are engaged in the complexities of decolonizing and colonizing. So yes, many of the ways in which we approach this work have the potential for supporting decolonization. However, a lot of the way we think about things in general from this Western perspective is not only potentially, but absolutely colonizing. So I think that's where, you know, we started talking about what next and where do we go next. And I think this sort of understanding of how complex ideologies are, and the reality and the political realities and the material realities of colonization processes, how we're part of that too. So I think this is a very, very relevant question and thought, and it's one we just need to keep working on all together. But just thank you for the comment, because I do think it's one of those huge tensions.
And what a perfect place to end, because it's like we always end in some new tension that isn't sorted out yet. If you're not a member of AFTA and you want to be part of these kinds of ongoing interactions, you just go to afta.org and join.
Thanks,
And I'm
everybody.
sitting-
We're so open to conversation.
And,
If you want to have a conversation, just let us know.
On the 27th, Mona and Jay LeBeau are talking about the book on which I was able to review earlier on. It's a case book on couple therapy, but it's kind of like what the therapist is thinking.
Oh, awesome.
Inside. It's a wonderful book, and they'll be presenting that. And then on March 3rd, Catherine is presenting on what's new in contextual therapy. And then the week after that, Sally and Tom Strong are presenting on their postmodern handbook. So lots of good conversations to be had. And we have a couple more lined up after that for this year. So
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And to everybody who came.
Catherine has her hand up.
oh, you're on mute.
Thank you, everyone.
It's
Thank you.
Catherine has her hand up.
See ya.
Catherine, you were on mute when you were talking.
Aló,
still on mute, Kevin.
quería agradecerle
Okay, I'm
a
good.
todas.
Okay, good.
Perdón.
One second. Presentation is on 6, not 3.
Oh,
So not Friday.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
I've been getting my dates all mixed up.
Muy bien.
Okay, thank you. so much.
Antonio, gracias por estar aquí también, de veras.
Thanks, everybody. Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Gracias a todos.